How a simple envelope unveiled a betrayal that destroys everything. It was the kind of life that many people envied. At least, that's what I had always thought. A steady job, a comfortable home in the suburbs, a family that, on the surface, appeared to be perfect. My name is Jim Carter, and I worked as an aerospace engineer for a well-known company. Every day was a reminder of how far I'd come. When I first entered the field, I had been an eager young man, working long hours and dreaming of the stars. Years of hard work had led to a position of respect, with the kind of salary that provided security and a home where I could raise my family. Susan, my wife, and I had been married for over 20 years. She was the love of my life, someone I met back in college when we were both young and ambitious. Suzanne had always been the type to make a house a home. Warm, inviting, with just the right balance of nurturing and discipline. She managed our household with grace while also balancing her own successful career as a corporate manager. We had 3 children, Sam, our oldest, who was entering high school, and the twins, Maggie and Emma, who were in their early teens. They were good kids, each with their own personalities, but all of them had the spark of energy that made the house feel alive. We had built a life together that, at the time, I thought was unshakable. But as the years went by, things started to change. It began slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the gentle shifting of sand beneath your feet. Suzanne, once so attentive and engaged, seemed distracted, and I wasn't sure why. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Work, kids, the daily grind. I figured she was just overwhelmed. I had seen it before in other people, in other marriages. She was probably tired. I, too, had my hands full, but I always managed to come home and check in, to keep the connection alive. Suzanne, however, started to retreat. It wasn't just her behavior that changed, it was the atmosphere in our home. The easy conversations we used to have, the way we would talk about everything. From the mundane to the deep thoughts that lingered in our hearts, those moments became rare. She became more absorbed in her phone, always texting or checking emails late into the night. When I would ask her about her day, she would respond briefly, distractedly. It wasn't like her at all. Suzanne had always been an open book, someone who wore her heart on her sleeve, but now it was as though a wall had been built between us, one brick at a time. I tried to be patient, to respect her space. After all, she was busy with work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There were moments when I would catch her looking at me with a strange look in her eyes, like she was unsure whether I was the man she had married. It wasn't anger or frustration, just something unspoken. I noticed that she was no longer interested in spending time with me the way she once had. She'd sit in front of the television, half watching a show, while I sat next to her, feeling more like a stranger than a husband. As the weeks went by, I started to question my own judgment. Was I imagining things? Was I simply overthinking it? I wanted to believe that this was just a phase, something that would pass. But then came Ben Edwards. Ben was Suzanne's boss. I had met him a few times at company events, and while I had always been polite, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about him was off. He was the kind of man who had an air of easy charm, always knowing just what to say to make people feel important. I watched how he interacted with Suzanne at the last company dinner we attended, his hand lingering a little too long on her shoulder, his smile just a little too broad when they spoke. At the time, I dismissed it as harmless office banter. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there was more to their relationship than met the eye. It wasn't long before Suzanne began working longer hours, staying late at the office, even attending business trips that seemed to pop up out of nowhere. I didn't mind at first. After all, we had both sacrificed time for our careers. But as the weeks passed, I began to notice patterns. A change in the way she spoke when she came home, a guardedness in her tone when I asked her about her day. And then there were the little things. She started wearing outfits that were just a bit more put together when she went to the office, even on days when she had no meeting scheduled. I could tell she was being careful with her appearance, something she hadn't done in years. I didn't know why it bothered me so much. Maybe it was the way she tried to hide it from me, or maybe it was the subtle shift in her attitude, but something about it didn't sit right. I began to ask more questions, trying to gather information. Anything that might explain the growing distance between us. I would ask her about Ben, about her work trips. She'd respond in a way that seemed a little too rehearsed, too smooth. "Ben's just doing his job," she'd say, or, "The company really needs me right now. There's a lot of pressure, you know." But I could see through the cracks. Something had changed. The woman I married, the woman who once filled our home with laughter and warmth, was slipping away. The harder I tried to reach her, the further she seemed to drift. I didn't want to believe it, but it was becoming increasingly clear. Something was wrong. One night, I came home earlier than usual from work. I thought I could surprise Suzanne, maybe take her out for dinner and talk, really talk. I had a feeling that if I could just spend some quality time with her, we could work through whatever was going on. But when I walked through the door, I found her sitting on the couch, her eyes glued to her phone, her fingers flying over the screen. She didn't even notice me at first. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "I thought we could grab dinner. Just the two of us." Suzanne looked up, startled. Her eyes were wide, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker in them. Guilt, maybe. She quickly put her phone down, her hands shaking ever so slightly. "I didn't expect you home this early," she said, her voice tight. "I know. I just thought I'd surprise you," I replied, my heart sinking. There was a pause, a silence that seemed to hang in the air. I sat down next to her on the couch, trying to read her face, but it was no use. There was something different about her, something I couldn't quite place, but that was more than just a change in routine. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice softer now. "You seem distant." She hesitated before answering, her gaze drifting to the floor. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost inaudible. "I don't know what's happening anymore, Jim. I just don't know." At that moment, I was struck by how far we had drifted. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that we had reached a tipping point, a place where silence had replaced the conversations, where small gestures of affection had disappeared. What had happened to the love we had once shared? The question echoed in my mind, and I couldn't find an answer. But then something unexpected happened. The following day, as I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, I saw an envelope on the counter. It was addressed to Suzanne, and it didn't look like any official correspondence from her work or anything we typically received. My curiosity piqued. I opened it. Inside was a hotel reservation confirmation. The name on the booking? Ben Edwards. The destination? A luxury resort in the mountains, far enough from the city to be out of reach, but close enough to raise suspicions. My heart raced as I read the details. The dates aligned perfectly with the time Suzanne would be away on her next business trip. She had never mentioned this, nor had I seen any indication that she was planning to stay overnight anywhere. It was all too deliberate, too coordinated. Suddenly, everything fell into place. The late nights, the guarded behavior, the secrecy. I sat there, stunned, holding the reservation in my hands, unable to move. The man who had once been my friend, the one I had trusted with my wife's well-being, was now the center of a betrayal I couldn't even begin to fathom. That was the moment I realized that the life we had built, the life I thought was unshakable, was in fact built on cracks that had been widening for years. The love I had given her, the sacrifices we had made together, seemed to have meant little in the face of this new reality. And now, everything was unraveling, leaving me with nothing but questions, anger, and the painful task of figuring out what came next. The foundation I thought was solid had crumbled beneath me, and I was left standing in the ruins of a marriage that had been, until that moment, the very definition of stability.